The town of Darnesville had always been quiet, so quiet, in fact, that when something strange started happening, no one knew what to make of it. The events didn't happen with a grand noise or terrifying spectacle. Instead, they unfolded in silence, creeping into the fabric of the community until it was too late to stop them. It began with the disappearance of Bethany Reed, a local college student who was known for her adventurous spirit and curiosity. She was last seen walking home from the town library one late evening, her footsteps echoing against the cold, empty streets. When she didn't return by morning, her roommates assumed she had stayed at her friend's house. By the time the sun had set, the entire town had begun searching for her, but it was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. Sheriff Jacob Moore was the first to investigate the library. The library, like many of the buildings in Darnesville, stood old and proud with brick walls, wooden beams, and a musty smell that always lingered in the air. There was nothing particularly strange about it, except for the one detail that would haunt the sheriff for the rest of his life. On the night of her disappearance, the library's security footage showed something that couldn't be explained. Bethany entered the library at 8:35 p.m., the footage revealed. She walked to the back, browsing the shelves like any normal patron. But it was what happened after that no one could have predicted. At exactly 9:17 p.m., she looked up from a book she had been holding. Her face was drawn, as if she were staring at something in absolute fear. For a brief moment, her lips trembled, and she appeared to whisper something, though the audio was too faint to make out. Then, in one swift motion, her body twisted, as though pulled by an unseen force, and she disappeared into the shadows near the back exit. The footage cut to black. No one could explain it. No one wanted to believe it. Sheriff Moore was not one to easily succumb to superstition, but what he saw on that tape rattled him. He gathered a team of deputies to scour the library and its surroundings, but there was nothing. No signs of a struggle, no trace of Bethany anywhere. Just silence and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Days passed, and no one could shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in Darnesville. People began locking their doors earlier in the evening, and whispers of strange happenings swirled through the town. More people began disappearing, quietly, like pieces of a puzzle falling off the table one by one. The sheriff couldn't stop the vanishing. It seemed as though the very walls of the town were conspiring against them. It wasn't until the third disappearance that the town's true nightmare began to unfold. Ben, a journalist who had recently moved to Darnesville to escape the city's noise and his failing marriage, began writing about the strange occurrences. He spent nights in the library, combing through old records and journals, trying to find a connection between the missing persons and any historical events. What he found was chilling. The town's founder, a man named Jonathan Darnes, had been rumored to dabble in the occult. Old records mentioned strange rituals, symbols carved into trees deep in the woods, and whispers about a pact made with an entity that could manipulate the very fabric of reality. As Ben dug deeper, the details grew more disturbing. The last entry in Darnes' journal, written just before his sudden disappearance over a century ago, read, "They like it darker. They want to see us. They want to feed." The more Ben uncovered, the more restless he became. It wasn't just the people disappearing, it was the town itself that felt wrong. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if it was heavy with something unseen. The streets, though bustling during the day, seemed to stretch and twist in strange ways at night. He noticed his own reflection in mirrors was growing weaker, more distorted, every time he looked. One night, Ben decided to confront the sheriff. They met at the diner, the only place still open after sunset, and the conversation quickly turned serious. "I've found something, Jacob," Ben said, his voice low, as if afraid of being overheard. "This town isn't just haunted, it's feeding on us." The sheriff leaned forward, his face grim. "What do you mean?" Ben's eyes darted around, ensuring no one was listening. "I've been looking into the town's history, and I think I've found a pattern. People aren't just vanishing, they're being taken. The town itself it's drawing them in, and it's been happening for generations." Jacob shook his head, disbelief clouding his expression. "You're talking nonsense. People just disappear sometimes. They leave town or..." His words trailed off, as though he, too, was beginning to feel the weight of something pressing down on his chest. Ben continued, ignoring the sheriff's protest. "I've been feeling it too. The air feels thicker every day, and I swear the street corners look different now. The ground feels wrong." Just as Jacob opened his mouth to respond, a loud crash echoed from the street. Both men shot to their feet, hearts racing. Outside, the sky was darker than it had ever been, the stars swallowed by a deep, suffocating blackness that had no business being there. It was as though the town itself had been consumed by a shadow, a darkness that was crawling across the land, seeking to swallow everything in its path. Ben and Jacob rushed outside, only to be greeted by a sight they would never forget. The town square was empty except for the growing figure of a monstrous shape at the far end. It was moving, slowly, like a shadow made of nightmares, and it was hungry. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The buildings around them groaned, as though the town itself was alive and shifting, rearranging itself to make room for something far older than anyone had realized. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rotting wood, and an unearthly screech echoed from the depths of the earth. And then, from the darkened streets, figures began to emerge. They were the missing townsfolk, pale, hollow-eyed, and grotesque. Their skin seemed to have been stretched, their mouths open in silent screams. They shuffled forward, mindless, drawn to the growing shadow. Jacob turned to Ben, panic rising in his chest. "What is this? What's happening?" Ben was speechless, his body frozen in terror as he stared at the thing before them. The figure, an entity of pure darkness, stood taller than any man, its features constantly shifting like smoke. Its eyes were voids black, endless holes that seemed to absorb everything around them. It was the hunger of the town. The ancient pact made by Jonathan Darnes had created a town that fed not on food, but on souls. The shadows beneath the surface had been waiting, patient, and now they were rising.